Happy Friday morning and welcome to our devotional journal study. And today's study is going to be on Rachel. You'll find her story in Genesis chapter 29, verses 17 and 18. We'll go ahead and start with the Bible first. Leah was tender-eyed, but Rachel was beautiful and well-favored. And Jacob loved Rachel and said, I will serve thee 7 years for Rachel, thy younger daughter. Okay. I looked up how it talks about with Leah having tender eyes, and there's several different things. It could have meant that her eyes were weak, sort of like mine. I have to wear glasses. Or it could have been something that she was born physically wrong with her eyes, as is being cross-eyed. There are several different stories on that. Okay, so I wanted to also let you guys know that Jacob's name was changed to Israel after he had wrestled with an angel of the Lord, and God changed his name from Jacob to Israel. So when we hear about the 12 tribes of Israel, it's actually not talking about the country Israel. It's talking about the 12 tribes of his sons. And so I'll tell you a little bit of the story before we start reading what the journal has to say. I thought that I would just try to do this. Some of the ladies enjoyed it for having a little bit of input in it. So I thought that I would name off the 12 sons that Jacob had, and he had one daughter, and her name was Dinah. But the 12 sons that he had were by 4 different women. He first married Leah, which is Rachel's oldest sister, and that was done because he was tricked into marrying her. And we'll read about that here in a minute. And then each of the ladies, Leah had a maid and Rachel had a maid. And they end up offering their maid to their husband to have more children. So I'll start with the oldest son. We'll go down to the last son, and I'll tell you who the mothers were. So remember, Leah is the oldest sister. Rachel was the youngest. Rachel was the more probably spoiled. She was more loved. She was beautiful. And therefore, Leah wasn't as beautiful. And she knew herself that she wasn't as loved as much as Rachel. But the first 4 sons were given to Jacob by Leah. They're all 4 hers. So the first one is Reuben, Simon, Levi, Judah. All 4 of those were by Leah. And then Rachel's maid was given to her husband, and she ended up having a son named Dan. Her name was Bilhah. And then Zilpah, is Leah's maid. So when Leah found out that her sister Rachel had given her maid, then she decided she was going to too. And that way they could have more children for her to take, control of and to have as her own. So Zilpah was her maid, and she ended up having a son named Gad, and then a second son named Asher. And then Leah herself gave birth to 2 more sons, Issachar and Zebulun. And then finally, Rachel has 2 sons, Joseph and Benjamin. Now, Joseph, when he was old enough to have children, Jacob actually adopted his first 2 sons. Excuse me. That was how they did things back in those days. And I looked that up to find out why. And first of all, Joseph being the firstborn of Rachel's, and Jacob was more in love with Rachel and thought of her as the most beautiful, he took her first son as, his favorite. And he thought highly of him, so he chose his first 2 sons that Joseph had as would be his adopted children. Their names was Manasseh and Ephraim. And the reason that they did that back in that time was Jacob was going to have a large, let's see, what would be the word? When he passed away, he would have an inheritance. I don't know why I couldn't think of that. But anyway, Jacob, now called Israel, would have a large inheritance, and he wanted those two boys to be, to also have equally as his own natural-born sons would. At the time, during all this, it wasn't yet a law that the men had to only have one wife. So after Jacob, he stole his older brother's inheritance. Jacob feared his brother's wrath, and he fled to Haran. Now, if you want to read about that story, how Jacob stole his older brother's inheritance, it's a really, really good story too. But if you want to read about that, it's in Genesis chapter 27. It's where Isaac gives Jacob the blessing that was intended for Esau. Okay, we'll go ahead and read from the journal now. Jacob did what Mama wanted. He looked for a woman of his own people to marry. At his father's bidding, he traveled to his uncle Laban's home and sought out one of Laban's daughters as his wife. At a well near Laban's home, Jacob met Rachel, the shepherdess, and watered her sheep. Surely he wanted to impress this beautiful woman, and he did just that. Rachel went home to her father and told him about his sister's son. Within a month, Jacob was deeply in love. To secure his bride, he promised to work for Laban for 7 years, but they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. At the end of those years, they had a wedding celebration. But that first night, Laban duped his nephew by bringing his daughter Leah to the new son-in-law's bed. Jacob didn't discover the deception until morning. Angry at Laban, he still demanded the woman that he loved. Rachel's father promised her to Jacob as a second wife, setting up a terrible situation for all involved. Rachel undoubtedly felt used by her father's duplicity and betrayed by her sister. After all, for 7 years, everyone had known of Jacob's love for her, and then there was the embarrassment of it all. Those emotions would overcome or overwhelm Rachel her whole life. But Jacob still loved Rachel best, and they started their married life. She must have felt the promise of their love, only to have it denied as babies failed to appear. Jacob and Rachel's great passion did not bear the fruit that seemed so necessary to a woman's happiness. Instead, Leah had the children, and the more children she had, the more Leah hoped her husband would love her. But after 4 sons, nothing had changed in her emotional life. Jacob still loved Rachel, and Leah, too, felt betrayed. Following in Sarah's footsteps, the loved but angry and jealous Rachel gave her maid Bilhah to Jacob to have children in her place. Rachel named Bilhah's second son Naphtali, meaning my struggle. Rachel proclaimed, I have had a great struggle with my sister, and I have won. Obviously, family harmony didn't live in these tents. Leah, seeing that Bilhah was having children, did the same as Rachel, giving her maid Zilpah to Jacob. So 2 more children were born into this unhappy family. Then Leah had 3 more children, including Jacob's only daughter. Finally, God remembered Rachel, and she bore Joseph, who would one day be second only to Pharaoh. Jacob wanted to return to his homeland. For a while, Laban convinced him to stay by offering Jacob whatever he wanted. Once Jacob had developed a large flock, though he fled with the goodwill of his wives. There was nothing to bind them to their home. Laban followed, searching for the household gods Rachel had hidden in her tent. He didn't find them, as Rachel was sitting on them, saying she couldn't stand during her monthly custom of women. After Laban, the deceiving father, had himself been deceived, Jacob and his family went on their way. Jacob settled in Bethel, where Rachel had a second son, but shortly after his birth she died. Though she asked that he be named Ben-Oni, which means son of trouble, Jacob called him the more positive Benjamin, son of my right hand. Rachel and her sister mothered the sons who began Israel's 12 tribes. Though the lives of Rachel and Leah were much less than smooth, God kept his promise to make a large nation of Israel. Like these two women, we may experience hardship due to others' decisions, but God is always in control, planning things we have yet to see. If Rachel had known she'd have two sons, would she have started the baby competition with her sister? Maybe if she'd waited, she would have had 4 more sons to make up those 12 tribes. We'll never know. But we do know we can always trust our Lord. No one derails his plans. Just a little bit about Dinah, the only daughter that Jacob had. We had done her study a while back, and it's in Genesis chapter 34, verse 1. She was raped, and it caused a whole lot to happen. So if you want to go and read that, feel free to. It's a good story. I liked hearing about Rachel, and it's good to go back sometimes, and these are all in, of course, the Old Testament. Laws had changed after this, and they were no longer permitted to marry more than one, which, if that was the case, then, Jacob would have never got to marry Rachel. I think it'd be very, very sad to actually have fallen in love with someone and then be tricked like that and not be able to marry your true love. So even though she probably died very young after the birth of her second son, so okay, if you want to go ahead and do more study on that, help yourself. If you've got questions or comments, go ahead and leave them below. Just wanted everyone to know that Steve's going to start doing a Bible study for men starting this Tuesday. And we're just going to do like I do here. We're just going to film it, and you guys can watch it just, whenever you get a free moment to. So I know a lot of you guys were looking forward to that, and tell your friends and your husbands and anybody else that would maybe be interested to learn a little bit along with Steve. Steve has a lot of teaching. He's taught Sunday school class for many years. He's not doing it now, but he has a lot of knowledge, and he studies the Bible, reads the Bible every single day, and so I'm really proud of him for putting God first in all things. So, just wanted to give you guys that reminder. So the next person that the ladies here we're going to do is Rahab, and her story is found in Joshua chapter 2, verse 1. So if you guys want to go ahead and read on about that before next week, feel free to. And I hope that you guys are blessed with a great weekend and good health. Take care of yourself. There's a lot of sickness going around. So God bless you all. And thank you so much for being here with me. And talk to you soon. Bye-bye.